Immigration should not be considered in a partisan way because there are way more economic benefits to immigration. If you don't care about the humanitarian aspects of it, and some people don't, and that's their own choice, I'm never going to appeal to them with any of my humanitarian reasons. But if you just look at the economic reasons, immigration makes sense from an economic point of view.
That was Fiona McEntee, American immigration attorney. And I'm Martin Nutty.
And I'm John Lee. Welcome to another conversation for the global Irish nation on Irish Stew. Today's episode of Irish Stew is sponsored by Ogham Art, where you can find original prints, jewelry, home decor, and custom gifts featuring Ogham, the first written form of the Irish language. Visit oghamart.com, and that's OGHAMART.com. And listeners can save 20% at oghamart.com using coupon code Irish Stew. That's OGHAMART.com.
Hi, this is Martin Nutty on the Irish Stew podcast, conversation for the global Irish nation. And I'm delighted to be here once again with my co-host, John Lee. John, tell us who we've got coming up on the show.
Hey, thank you, Martin. Well, first of all, I want to mention that I realize you're not just a digital presence. We actually saw each other today in person, which was quite a rare event as you were passing off the book of one of our future guests. So good to get a chance to see the legend from the east side of town.
Yeah, I'm just a legend in my own mind, I think, rather than anybody else's. But, if you want to inflate me, that's cool. I'll go with that.
There you go. Well, you're the executive chef of Irish Stew, and today, adding to the stew from Dublin, now Chicago, we have Fiona McEntee, and she is, she's been on CNN, MSNBC, CBS, BBC, RTE, but now she has reached the pinnacle of the media world. She is joining us here on Irish Stew. Welcome, Fiona.
Thank you so much. I am honored to be here.
Yeah, we're going to get into a big topic today, and then we're going to also find out about kind of how you got from here to there. But the topic, the word is immigration. You're a noted immigration attorney, and I can't think of a word right now that's more charged in the political landscape than immigration. You think of, in America, I think the image, you immediately go to the wall along the border. In Europe, maybe it's the visions of the migrants crossing the Mediterranean in rubber boats. But there's a lot more dimensions to immigration. There's a lot more almost day-to-day business aspects of immigration. What do you think is maybe the biggest thing that people don't understand about the topic of immigration?
I mean, I think you did a good job of characterizing the current, I guess, it's always probably been quite political, but I think it's been really brought to the forefront over the past few years. I mean, certainly with the prior administration, immigration was like the number one thing that was on the kind of the chopping block almost since, from the campaign trail of Donald Trump into the presidency. And so I think kind of what we do became way more mainstream in terms of like media stuff. I mean, the presidency of Trump started out with all of us attorneys at airports in throughout the US. And that's kind of how I started doing my media stuff, was from O'Hare Airport on the first day of the Muslim ban. And so, yeah, it's been really just, I think, a central topic of conversation around dinner tables across the US. Maybe before it hadn't really been that way. And I think now with the pandemic, right, the whole thing about mobility of people and travel and stuff like that is very much an issue of immigration as well. So I think maybe before the Trump presidency, people just were not really aware of the practice of immigration law as kind of its own entity. And I think now, people know a little bit more about what we do on a daily basis.
Well, you've got a very personal connection to the immigrant story, being an immigrant yourself. So let me turn you over next to our resident immigrant, Crypto Irish American Martin Nutty.
You're using all sorts of fancy words today, John.
That's usually your thing, but
crypto American, that sounds quite sinister, like I'm engaged in something totally nefarious. But I'm actually delighted to have a fellow dub on the show today. And I find it fascinating, Fiona, that you have gotten involved in immigration law. It's hardly a practice in Ireland of great significance, although that seems to be changing in recent decades. But I'm curious as to the backstory. Dublin to Chicago, how does that happen? How do you get involved in this business?
Yeah, well, likewise, Martin, about up the dubs, it's always nice to meet a fellow Dubliner. So you're totally right, though, about that. When I started studying law in UCD at home, so it's University College Dublin, for those not familiar with the acronym, but so I started studying there, and I got an opportunity to go on an exchange program to a law school in Chicago when I was only 20, and it was a part of would have been my third year in law. It was, third year in studying law. And I've always had an interest in social justice issues, even from before I even started studying law. And I kind of tell people that my dad's nickname for me has been Save the Whales from when I've been about 8 years old. Like, I was always, we'd be having conversations around dinner, and I'd be talking about the union workers and, the rights of the traveling community in Ireland and all that kind of stuff, and environmental issues. And so I thought I'd do like environmental law or something like that, but immigration wasn't even a course that was offered in UCD back then. Nobody knew. I didn't even know about it myself. But when I went over to college here for a year, I saw it on the class list, and I started, kind of specialize. Like, I took a class in immigration law. And so I was here for a year basically in college. And then I went back to UCD, graduated, and then came back out to do a Juris Doctor. And it was actually during that time that I found immigration law and fell in love with it straight away. I mean, I think it kind of ticked a few of the boxes that that were really important to me. It was a social justice thing, and it was something that I could really relate to, having moved from Ireland to the US. And I mean, I had no idea it would turn into the practice that it is today, but I have been practicing in this field for 13 years or so, my whole career as an attorney, and then working in it before I graduated from law school as well.
I'm curious, right? I came to America in 1983. That was a very kind of different economic situation in Ireland compared to the Ireland that you graduated from in the early 2000s, before the financial crisis. In other words, the possibility of making a decent living had then become a reality. And actually, you do see the starts of immigration into Ireland at that point as a result. So what spurred you to leave, since economics probably wasn't as much the driver? Why come to Chicago at that point?
Yeah, you're totally right. And I think we've seen the kind of emigration from Ireland in different waves and different economic circumstances. And that has definitely been part of the Irish story. And when I left, so I had come for that 1 year and really I fell in love with Chicago, but also the way of practicing law here is different. I mean, if you think about how the legal profession is set up in Ireland, it's barrister and solicitor. It is very also, I mean, I was the first person to go to college in my family. Like, my parents are from big, typical big Irish family. They were small business owners. They worked really hard, but they never got the opportunity to go to college. So I didn't know any lawyers at home. I didn't have any family connections. And a lot of the people I was studying law with in Ireland, their dads were judges, their mums were barristers, and I didn't have that. And that's not why I left. But, America seemed kind of different. It seemed like, that you didn't necessarily know people who were in your class didn't always come from a legal background. And I loved the idea of the unified legal profession. So just a lawyer, not a barrister, not a solicitor. And so that was actually appealing to me from a career point of view. And when I was here that first year, I'd worked for the State's Attorney's Office. I'd clerked in that. And I just felt like I could make I just thought there might be some good opportunities, even at a young age. And I guess that I was right. It worked out, pretty well. But that was one thing about the legal profession here that really appealed to me. That was different to the legal profession at home.
So out of your class in Ireland, how many actually fetched up over here? Are you the lone wolf in the crew?
I've always taken the path less traveled, but so for that exchange program that we went on, there were 7 of us from UCD that came to Chicago, and there have been, over the years, probably hundreds, right? When you think about it, there were 7 each year that came to Chicago, but then there was other law schools as well that people went to. There was one in Minnesota. There's been a few others, I think, added since. So there've been hundreds of exchange students that have come over the years. But from my year, there's myself and my friend Alan Devlin, who is a lawyer. He's like a leading antitrust attorney in just outside of Washington, DC. So myself and him stayed on. And there've been a few since, but not that many. I think a lot of people do end up just coming for the year and going back home, which obviously, people find paths that suit them accordingly. But myself and Alan, it's funny that the 2 of us out of that class of 7 that ended up in Chicago are still in the US.
Fiona, you're pursuing immigration as a career and you're living an immigrant life at the same time. And I wonder how those two play off each other. And also, we talk to a lot of people who come over to the States to get their feel for the sort of changing perception of what it was to be Irish in Dublin versus what it is to be Irish in Chicago. And of course, we've concentrated with a lot of Irish Americans in the New York area, but Chicago is one of the great Irish centers. They dye the River green, maybe up until this year. I'm not sure on St. Patrick's Day, but maybe you could kind of talk a little bit about that sort of being an immigrant whilst working in immigration and the experience of being Irish in Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that I tell my clients is that I have gone through the immigration process myself. And so, I can totally empathize with people in situations. I see it from a different point of view. I don't know how other attorneys see it. I know how I see it. I know when people talk about wanting to travel home for whether it's a wedding, funerals, big things at home, I know how that feels. I'm a naturalized US citizen now, and I am so, so grateful that I've been able to navigate that immigration process. But I'm also really aware of my privilege, though. I had a very privileged immigration journey. And that, I think, is relevant when talking about the experience of being an Irish immigrant in Chicago, because I was extremely welcome to Chicago in any type of setting. And I think that's, that's kind of how I've made so many connections in the legal industry in particular, because there are so many Irish American judges, lawyers, people who've really taken me under their wing and treated me so well and treated me like I was their niece or their cousin, or, made intros for me and been really, really, really welcoming. And I think that, you need to kind of view your immigrant experience, well, I do anyway, through that lens, and just recognizing that I am in a huge position of privilege, and I try to use that privilege to be an advocate for all immigrants. And I'm really, really aware of that. And I think that has kind of made me, maximize that privilege, whether it's media opportunities or writing or whatever it is, to try to get people to see, that the Irish weren't always so welcome in the US, and that we, looking at the border today, there are so many parallels with the Irish who came here in coffin ships across the Atlantic. And, they came here, they did not have an education when they were coming here. They were coming in really fleeing like desperate times, like from economic scarcity to so many parallels with exactly what's happening at the border. And I think that some people have very short memories. And, I think we have to remind people. There was a great, Fintan O'Toole wrote a fantastic piece in the New York Times a few St. Patrick's days ago. And he talks about this, kind of historical amnesia. where you're wearing and it was particularly in the Trump administration when they had the Muslim ban there, and they were simultaneously, wearing shamrock like pants and kind of drinking green beer, and his piece was like, I always quote it and remember it, where how memories can be really short, and you can't really on the one hand celebrate your heritage as being Irish, and then on the other hand, not be welcoming to immigrants of today.
I think that's a theme we're going to develop a little bit here. And just to throw in a personal note, I'm also from a position of privilege. My grandparents went through the hardship and the struggles and the turmoils of coming over here. So, I didn't experience them myself firsthand, but I have gone through the system in a sense. My wife is from Italy, and she came over on a fiancé visa. And that was one of the most excruciating bureaucratic things I've ever been through. We had everything was right. There were no problems. There were no issues. And, I had hair at that time, so it all got pulled out. It was really an ordeal until we made the final hurdle. And then the last phase of it was fine. But, we all spoke the language. I can't imagine what it's like if you're coming in and just not having that advantage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You alluded to the fact that your situation was somewhat privileged in the sense that you're highly educated and you're arriving in America. And my understanding of immigration, and we talk about immigration law, there are many different ways that you can come into the country. Mm-hmm. So let's say people have certain in-demand talents. I believe that's kind of one class of immigrant. And then, of course, you've got sadly, the type of immigrant maybe that's coming as a political refugee. And then you've got somebody else maybe that's in here in an undocumented status. Mm-hmm. But, I'm just talking as a layman as opposed to somebody that really understands the deeper areas. So what kind of span of practice are you engaged in if you look at all these various categories?
Yeah, and that's a good way to kind of think about it. And there's different ways to come to the US. There's also temporary and permanent ways as well. So the green card is like the permanent way, and there's different ways to do that within those types of there's different ways to get a green card. And then there's the temporary visas, which, sometimes people's ultimate goal is green card. And so I came here as a foreign student and then got sponsored by a law firm actually for a green card. And so I've gone through the employment-based immigration process, even though then I subsequently married my husband. But that was the joke. We were laughing about that at home. They were like, "Oh, the wedding's off. She's got her green." I got my green card through the just before I got married to him. But so yeah, I can. As far as me and my day-to-day practice, what I do. So our firm, there's about 13 of us in the firm. We handle all types of immigration. So we do asylum cases as well as like deportation defense, as well as DACA. But I personally do a lot of business immigration. So I help a lot of, not just Irish companies, but companies who are expanding into the US. I help them with that in terms of the immigration for their staff. I do a lot of extraordinary ability visas. So a lot of O1s I do, that's the O1A is for extraordinary ability in business, science. O1B is arts and entertainment. So we do music visas, and we do like stuff for producers, directors, and then I would say the startup technology industry is like a big kind of niche of ours as well. So it's pretty varied, like full service practice throughout the firm. And then we do a lot of pro bono work. We run the Irish Immigration Clinic here through the Chicago Irish Immigrant Support, that's part of a bigger group for the Coalition of Irish Immigration Centres that receives funding through the Immigrant Support Programme from the Irish government. So we run the pro bono clinic there. It's on once or twice a month, depending on demand. And so we'll take on some pro bono cases through that as well.
Fiona, you mentioned the idea of people needing clearance to come over here temporarily. And I know you've worked with you also mentioned musicians. Tell us about some of the, performers that you may have worked with and help bring over to the United States.
Yeah, that's, I mean, really a really fun part of our job is that we do a lot of those music type visas. So we have some pretty big name clients. The Coronas are the huge household name in Ireland. They've been our clients for years and years and years. And I know them personally. And so it's always such a treat getting to work on those music cases. And our office is in a big music and entertainment studio in Chicago. So we're very kind of into the music and creative technology, spaces. But what I love about that is that, when our clients play in Chicago, we will go to see them as a team. And so one thing we did when the Coronas were in Chicago, I organized like a special meet and greet. And so we brought all, there's all those Irish American judges that I mentioned before. We had them in, we had like a VIP, like meet and greet. And then they got to see them and meet them and hear some of their music, which is great because a lot of times people think of Irish music, the view of Irish music is, the traditional music, and they're not really aware of this like cool indie rock scene. And that's just not kind of what they think of when they hear Irish music. But that's the fun part of our job. And then they played at Lollapalooza, which to me was like such a huge deal because I've known them since they were really, really starting out, and then to see them up on such a big stage was just really special, and it was just made me really proud to see an Irish band, whether they're my clients or friends or not. Just getting to see that up there was, it was really, really nice. And we've a lot of great talent coming out of Ireland, and it's just nice that America gets to think of, something other. And traditional Irish music is great. I love that too. But it's not the only type of music that comes out of our country.
Yeah, one of my brushes with fame actually happened quite early on in my life. A guy called David Evans used to play soccer in my soccer team when I was 7 or 8 years old. And that gentleman went on to fame and fortune as The Edge, the lead guitarist at U2.
Wow.
And I always kind of say that, in Ireland, there's always 2 degrees of separation between people. And it's kind of surprising now. David Evans would know me from the hole in the wall.
You held on to that one, Martin. Wow. I had not heard that story.
Yeah, it's just another one of the neighbors, so to speak.
And his name, I never even knew that was his name. I guess, I mean, does anyone even know that that's his real name?
Well,
you do.
I think if you go on to Wikipedia, you can probably get that. But he's just The Edge.
The Edge.
But
very cool.
Hugely talented guy, obviously.
Yeah.
But you alluded to the fact that when you came into the country, that you were sponsored by your law firm after you graduated college. And now, obviously, you have your own law firm, which I think you set up fairly quickly, right? You didn't kind of spend like 7 or 8 years, in a traditional law firm environment. You went out on your own. That seems pretty ballsy to me, for somebody, relatively young at the start of their legal profession. Can you talk me through that a little bit? How did that come about?
Yeah, so it was the firm that I worked with out of law school. So bear in mind that like I had a law degree from Ireland as well. So I've only ever studied law from when I've been 18, which is different to the American kind of law school experience where people go in at post a bachelor's degree. So, I had all that experience as well. And so I got hired at this firm that was a very high volume immigration practice. And I think it was my interview at the firm, they had said to me that 1 year of practice there is equivalent to about 7 years of practice in a general practice setting because of the types of cases, the type of volume. It was a pretty novel way of providing legal services. A lot of it was done kind of online through this, like their proprietary system. So it meant that, and we had like Fortune 50 clients, and so like very unique immigration issues, which, as any attorney will kind of tell you, like, the bulk of kind of what we do on day-to-day basis is like issue spotting and kind of making deductions from different issues and applying the law to that and kind of helping clients. So we were exposed all day long to these very unique issues in immigration because of the types of cases and the high volume nature of the practice. So after like 2 years of in that type of practice, it was probably equivalent to at least, like as someone had said, like 1 year was equivalent to 7. So I got so much experience in such a short period of time that, shortly thereafterwards, then after those like 2+ years, I set up my own firm. And that's been, 10, 11 years since then and going strong. But it's the training that you can get when you're exposed to those types of cases at such an intensity and such a volume is tremendous. I don't think I would have been able to do it had I worked anywhere else, honestly, for that length of time. So
you kind of skill up really quickly as a result of that. But, you can hang out your shingle, but that doesn't mean that suddenly people are going to come knocking on your door. Obviously, when you're in the original firm, that firm has a reputation. Mm-hmm. When you set up your own firm, you're essentially starting to some degree from scratch. Now, I'm guessing some of your clients from those days probably came over, but it's still, kind of indicates to me an entrepreneurial drive, which is probably not something that you always find in the legal profession. So why take that risk?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I guess one thing I think that's relevant to immigration and entrepreneur. I've heard immigration being described as the great entrepreneurial journey. And I think that has always stood out to me because I think the type of person that emigrates to the US generally is pretty motivated and determined anyway. And that's my experience of working with foreign students and other types of immigrants, is that that's a kind of a common thread. Secondly, my mum and dad were entrepreneurs. So we grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. So it is kind of second nature to me. My mum owned hair salons and barber shops and stuff like that. And I grew up from pretty young age working in my mum and dad's news agents from when I was a young teenager, like 12, 13. I've always had a job working for them weekends. And so hard work and running your own business is something that, it was kind of inevitable. I was always hopefully going to get the opportunity to do it. And I think that that's another thing about the legal profession over here versus at home. I think you don't hear of people setting up, having solo practices as much as you would here. It generally tends to be done at home in more traditional firm settings is what you see typically. So yeah, I mean, I hoped that I would always set up my own business and and I love being my own boss and having a team and, lead, trying to be a good leader to them. But so that's kind of how I thought it would happen. I wanted to make it happen and thankfully I got that opportunity.
Fiona, you said something back there that I kind of sketched down here, issue spotting. I found that very interesting. It has a kind of fingers on the pulse sort of feel to it. What issues are you spotting now? And are there any hopeful, optimistic issues that you're looking at in immigration?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many issues in immigration right now. A lot of them are, pandemic related, I would say, in relation to backlogs with appointments and processing times. There's class action litigation surrounding that with the Department of State and things of that nature. There are, one thing that I see in terms of promising, and this is something that I have been working on for about 10 years, and I'm very, very passionate about this, is trying to get a startup visa passed for foreign founders of startups. It is a surprise to a lot of people when they hear that the US does not have a startup visa for these amazing immigrant entrepreneurs. I'm not talking about the E2 investor visa. This is specific to startup entrepreneurs who get funding, to raise funding through venture capital or angel investors or that type of thing. So many other countries has a startup visa for this particular situation, and the US does not. And we are at such a huge competitive disadvantage because we don't have this. So a lot of times how this kind of flows, to just imagine what this looks like, is that a foreign student comes here, during school, during college. the colleges have all these entrepreneurship incubator centers, so they're encouraging innovation and all that kind of stuff. And so they have an idea, they set up a company through this, with the support of the school and the encouragement, this fantastic idea, whether it's an app or, this or loads of different creative solutions to problems that we have. And then they start working on it and they get a 1-year work permit after graduation, sometimes an extra 2 years if they're in a STEM field. But then after that, sometimes you'll find that there's no option for them to stay and continue to grow the company. And it's because the existing immigration system, there's been no additional options added to it, in 20 plus years to, touch on some of these things. So we're trying to fit brand new tech type situations into a very old system that never even contemplated any of this type of thing. So sometimes they're forced to abandon their startup and get a job, take a H-1B, an employer-sponsored job, or leave the US and bring their startup and those jobs elsewhere. And so this has formed a crucial part of my advocacy for many, many years. There was a temporary solution that was kind of created during the Obama-Biden administration, but that was blocked by the Trump administration. And there's still no real proper permanent solution. So we think Congress is going to be, hopefully one of the Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren is going to be, I think, introducing a startup visa bill soon, we hope. And I think that's a huge area for opportunity because especially, mid or post pandemic, we need to have innovation in the US. If you look at the vaccines, there's so many immigrants connected to the creation of those vaccines. And it is a no-brainer. I don't care what party you vote for or what, a side of whatever aisle you're on. This should not be a controversial, partisan thing. This should be something that we should all agree upon, that we need to create some type of option to help the innovative immigrants that are here already, to help them stay here and grow these companies, but also to attract those who are not yet here, who could be here growing those companies and creating those jobs if we gave them that opportunity.
So it sounds like one of those many issues over the last few years where you couldn't believe there would be really two sides to the issue. You'd think it would be something everybody would be for. Turns out not the case. But you mentioned Obama, Biden. So let's go there for a moment with the Biden administration. I think there's certainly some signals, some language that seems to have changed. What are you seeing? What are you seeing that has been positive change so far? What still needs to be done?
Yeah, I think certainly there. It's funny that you mentioned language because I'm actually leading a panel on this exact thing at our American Immigration Lawyers Association at our national conference in June, specifically about the Biden administration's changes in relation to immigration, and we prepared a practice advisory on this exact topic. But one of the things that we did say was that, yes, there has been a change in language, right? So they're removing the word alien from the Immigration and Nationality Act. They do not want to use the word assimilation or the horrible I word that I'm not even going to say. So there's overhaul of language, which is important. It's not just symbolic. A language, how we treat and speak about immigrants, or how we speak about immigrants and the language we use, is absolutely important. And, we need to restore the dignity to immigrants because the Trump administration totally stripped that away and they completely dehumanized immigrants. So language is important. And I applaud the Biden administration for making those steps. However, it needs to be accompanied by action. And, the Biden, they have taken steps, right? Some things have been done that have, been for the, that have improved immigration. They've, rescinded the public charge rule that's been taken away. That was a horrible wealth test on immigrants that was just unnecessary. So that's gone. They took, they rescinded the Muslim ban. So they've done things like that. And we definitely applaud them. However, our foot is not off the gas just because there's a Democratic president in there. And there are definitely still things that have to be addressed, things that are causing huge pain and suffering to our clients. And one of them is the crisis level processing times at the USCIS. So that's the agency here in the US that's responsible for reviewing cases and approving and issuing like things like work cards. So people all across the US right now are off payroll because there's a gap in their work card. And there are things that can be done to fix that. Certain categories of work card can be automatically renewed. You know, you could get automatic continuous work authorization if you renew it timely. You know, that's a change that could be made to be across the board for the categories, other categories that are not included in that. Another thing is that, you know, there are hundreds of thousands of people outside the US that are waiting for visa appointments that based on current processing times or lack of availability, you know, who knows when they'll be able to come in, right? There's so much. And look, I want to recognize that we're in a global pandemic. We are being sympathetic. We know that the people had, you know, tough times over the past year, right? We recognize that. But, you know, there are people who are, you know, they won the green card lottery and their chance at getting that is expiring. There are families that have been separated for, you know, well over a year who are now looking at God knows what type of, you know, backlog or timeline to get that. Every day I'm inundated with all these messages from people who are, you know, supposed to get green cards through work or H-1B visas or whatever. There's all these travel bans. And so just to be totally clear, like nobody is saying, open, let everybody in. Like, who cares about the pandemic? You know, that's not at all what we're saying. What we're saying is that everybody else's job has had to be modified through Zoom and things like that because of the pandemic. So we think that there's room to do some additional, like maybe some interviews, visa interviews through Zoom, or there's other types of things that you can do maybe to try to get some of these people in and look at these travel bans. Do they make sense with a country like Ireland where there's a few hundred cases? Could we do vaccinations plus, you know, negative testing? And so there's definitely room for improvement, but they're the two kind of major, big, huge hurdles that we're seeing right now. And then obviously immigration reform just across the board is something that Congress absolutely needs to prioritize.
I think within our current political climate, there's a lot of hostility directed at immigrants. And I think you could kind of enumerate, you know, a variety of reasons why that might be. It seems to me that each presidential administration brings in, let's say, a certain predisposition towards immigration. Clearly, you know, we're transitioning from the Trump administration into the Biden administration. And it seems there was a sea change, I believe, under the Trump administration. Indeed, I think you alluded to it at the start of our conversation, saying your profile in the media had kind of emerged as a result of kind of dealing with the early days of the Trump administration and being out in the airport and helping with the Muslim ban. My interpretation of what happened under Trump was simply they just wanted to slam the door shut and they only wanted Northern Europeans to come into the country. Although my sense is that most Northern Europeans, seeing Donald Trump elected president, weren't particularly interested in coming into the country. Is that too simplistic a viewpoint, or what would your take be, you know, when you're looking at, you know, the experience of, you know, the prior 4 years with Donald Trump? How hard was that from your point of view?
It was really, really, really hard. I mean, the amount of stress in our immigration bar was unreal. I mean, but it wasn't, I mean, obviously our clients were experiencing horrendously traumatic situations as well. So it's obviously not about us as attorneys, but I mean, just seeing the trauma that our clients were going through. I mean, there is moms that are petrified every single day when they're dropping their kids off at school, not knowing if they're going to be there to pick them up because of this like deportation force that where every single person who was undocumented was a priority for deportation under the Trump administration. And that is a huge change from the Obama administration where there were priorities of deportations. Yes, Obama administration deported a lot, way more than, the numbers were huge. And there was obviously that administration was not perfect either. But what we saw under Trump, we had never witnessed before. I mean, the absolute like state sanctioned child abuse that was inflicted on those families at the border by this administration is utterly disgraceful. And, you know, it's human rights violations that were imposed. I mean, it is horrendous. And, but it was not limited to the stuff at the border. And I think that this is what people don't necessarily know. I mean, the business visa adjudications denial ratings went through the roof. And there was tons of litigation surrounding extraordinary ability visas being denied. We sued over an O1 denied and we got it approved. They took it back and approved it because they were, I think, embarrassed by the denial. And so it actually was not just limited to certain types of immigrants. There was this Buy American, Hire American executive order, which essentially, you know, the way they thought about immigration was just made no sense. It's like assuming you can substitute one person for another. Like, oh, you're a foreign student getting a work permit. Oh, why don't we just give that job to an American? It's like, this person has a STEM degree in, you know, biophysics, and, you know, there's nobody here that does these jobs. So I just think the way they viewed immigration is, you know, they had such a disdain for all types of immigrants is the thing. It wasn't limited to what we saw at the border. I mean, I think that's the stuff that was in the media because of how horrific it was, which it should have been. But there was this other parts of immigration that we were dealing with as well. And, you know, getting clients going in for an interview where they're setting up companies in the US and they're like hiring people and they're doing all this and they're being asked questions like, why can't an American do your job? You tell me why. And it's like, sorry, I've been like a manager of this company for 4 years and I'm going in to like interview people about this proprietary software. I mean, it was just like insane. So we were dealing with all that type of stuff as well, like foreign students. Like I wrote an opinion piece that was published in USA Today on the value of foreign students because of the likes of Ted Cruz, Senator Cruz, and all these other Republican senators saying that there's no reason why we should give these foreign students any type of work permit. And my op-ed was like, actually, here's all the reasons. I mean, they create nearly 500,000 jobs just by living in the US, right? They just, by virtue of being here, their presence, whether it's in the food services, you know, all these types of things. And so I think sometimes people view, that's a good example, these foreign students, right? There was threats to deport all foreign students last year when they were studying online. And then I had people emailing me saying, you know, people just like tweeting at me and all this kind of stuff. Like, why should we let them stay here if they need to study online? Like, why can't they do that from abroad? And I was like, do you know how many jobs they're creating and how much money they're putting into the US economy by living here? Like, that doesn't make any sense. I had like American landlords contacting me saying, what am I going to do if these foreign students get deported? And I'm like, can you get in touch with your local congressperson and tell them, you know, because immigration should not be considered like this in a partisan way, because there are way more economic benefits to immigration. If you don't care about the humanitarian aspects of it, and some people don't, and that's, you know, whatever, that's their own choice. I'm never going to appeal to them with any of my humanitarian reasons. But if you just look at the economic reasons, immigration makes sense from an economic point of view. This is why we need to pass immigration reform. It's going to be really good for the country. It'll put huge amount of money into the federal government. Immigrants are by just all the statistics will show that they're more entrepreneurial than native born Americans, twice as much. And we have all the data to support this. And could you imagine if we just give those immigrants who are undocumented the opportunity to regularize their status, what they could do? It would be incredible. And so, I think that the past 4 years have really been hell. And that's like, to put it bluntly, but I think people need to be aware because, you know, we could end up back there in a few years' time, right? And we need to learn from those horrific, you know, things that we've gone through. And you know, we really do need to reflect back on it and think, how did we get there? And how do we make sure that we never, ever get there again?
Yeah, you kind of alluded to immigration reform, and obviously we're hopeful. And you also alluded to the fact that the law really hasn't changed in 20 years. And from what I understand, there's somewhere between 20 and 30 million undocumented immigrants in this country. I'm not sure of those numbers. It's difficult to wrap your head around those actual numbers. But when I talk to people suggesting that these people should be naturalized, I get a lot of pushback from peers basically saying, okay, well, if you let these guys in, then what are you going to do to stop the next set that are going to do exactly the same thing? Because we did this back in the Reagan administration, I guess around 1984, thereabouts. There was an amnesty, which is, the nasty A word that people use. Mm-hmm. What's to stop a recurrence of this? What's the sane solution, for immigration into America that recognizes the value of immigration as a contribution towards the American economy? It's not all burden. Some mm-hmm. immigration is a burden, but a lot is not. A lot is beneficial. I get that point. But what does the right shape of this look like?
Yeah, I mean, look, the number that we hear a lot is 12 million undocumented immigrants in the mm-hmm. US. And I mean, a lot of these people have been here for a very long time. I have known some of these people personally. I know them through, as my clients, they are hardworking people. The vast majority, this is what I tell people, the vast majority of those people are working. They're not sitting here, living off the non-existent welfare system. They don't have access to the welfare system in the US. Is not why people come here anyway. If they were doing that, they would obviously be going somewhere else, because let's face it, it's not like, so that's not why people come here. And even undocumented immigrants do not have access to that anyway. People are working. They have employers who would do anything to help them stay here. These people are all contributing. They're paying taxes, despite what people are saying. They're absolutely paying taxes. I mean, I've heard the most horrific stories of people who came here, thinking the family immigration system, it can take 30 years to sponsor 40 years to sponsor your sibling. I mean, there's just not enough green cards to cope with the demand there. And I think that over time, we've seen what's happened. There's also gaps and like I've described, even in the startup industry or those types of things. The system is outdated. It is sorely in need of reform. It is, we need to recognize the value of immigrants, especially in the pandemic. There were these undocumented immigrants, a lot of them are doing essential work, and we're more than happy to reap the benefits of their labor and give them nothing in return. And it's not right, and it needs to end now. And the vast majority of Americans have always supported immigration reform, despite what, maybe conversations that you're having. The majority of Americans do support this. And I think, even the likes of George W. Bush wrote an op-ed about this. And so it is not a partisan thing. There are people that are, and look, I might be the most liberal Democrat or whatever that you'll meet, but I have no problem having conversations. I like discussing this stuff with people who don't agree with me. And I think that's what was the real shame under the Trump administration, was that people were not able to have these conversations anymore, because things became so polarized by the types of stuff that they were doing. But I mean, I have always been an optimist. I think a lot of my peers, my immigration lawyer friends, my colleagues, a lot of us share that trait, because I think it's hard to go into this line of work without feeling that type of way. But I believe that, by having these conversations and sharing actual facts, about immigration, and not fake news or whatever you want to call it, actual info about immigrants, that I think we can get closer to where we need to be. I think that the immigration system needs, honestly, huge overhaul. AILA, our Bar Association, has prepared very, very detailed policy recommendations for the Biden-Harris administration. And it's all different types of things, whether it's, options for foreign students post-graduation, reforming the family-based immigration system, about undocumented immigrants and what a pathway for them might look like. So I think there's extensive overhaul that needs to be done. But I think that the American public supports this. I know they do. And that I think that now is the time that we need to get it done. We can't sit back. We need to go with the momentum that we have and try and see what we can get done. And I know that Senator Durbin here in Illinois has dedicated his career to, he is just the most amazing advocate for the Dreamers. And, he has really done such great things. And I know that he's deeply committed to passing the Dream Act, Dream and Promise Act. And so there's other pieces of things. So I don't know how this is going to go, but I just know that this is the time. There's never been a more important time to get this done.
Fiona, I heard just enough optimism there that I was looking for. I know it's a thorny problem, it's a knotty problem, it's heading in the wrong direction in many ways, but there's things that can be done. So I'm gratified to hear a little sense of there is a way forward. Mm-hmm. And just one note, you talked about the visas for students, and I have a daughter in college now, and I'm keenly aware that the foreign students there, besides enriching the campus, they're paying full freight, which is helping my daughter out as well. So there's a lot of dimensions to this. I'd like to kind of, in a way, take you out of what you're doing right now and bring you back to Ireland for your, kind of this isn't the area you work in, but you would have some good perspectives. People emigrated from Ireland looking for opportunity. Now people are immigrating into Ireland looking for opportunity. How's it going? Could it go better? What's your view of immigration into Ireland?
Yeah, I mean, look, Ireland is by no means perfect either, right? And my criticism is not specific to the American immigration system, right? I think that we also have some work to do with direct provision and kind of our acceptance of refugees, asylees. I also think that, the Irish public as a whole, I think that there have been some reports that immigrants are, there is this right-wing kind of fringe element in Ireland, like in other countries that are very anti-immigrant. That is extremely disturbing to see as well. Now, I'm glad to see that by no means is that even half, or it's such a small fraction of the country. And I hope that it continues to just decrease. But there was a great film that I saw, was a documentary. I can't remember the name of it. I must find the name and look it up, but it was put on through, was it Solas Nua had put on a viewing of it. It's a few years old, but it was about immigrants to Ireland and kind of their experience of being an immigrant in Ireland, whether from Nigeria or, Eastern Europe. And it was kind of their perspective. And it actually showed some parts of Ireland in not a flattering light. And so it kind of highlighted this like fringe element. And I think it might just be called Immigrant, or I Am an Immigrant or something. I'll get the name and you can send it, but it is a few years old, but I think it's worth watching and it's worth thinking about, because what happened in the US, I mean, it's happened, similar things have happened in other European countries, and, Ireland is not necessarily immune from that, just because we have a very progressive society and a history of immigration. There are still people who, when for whatever reason, it's not just that they feel disenfranchised and they blame it. There's obviously more to it, and hatred and all that type of stuff. But I do think we need to watch that as well, because what happened in the US was so scary. And I think we have seen, that type of like element in other countries. And we just need to keep an eye on it and make sure that that we all do better. And the Black Lives Matter movement as well, kind of exposing racism in Ireland and that stuff as well, I think is something that we need to be discussing as well, and what the Irish identity looks like. Just the different nature of Irish society, with immigrants from all over. That's incredible. And we need to be embracing that and supporting that. And so I think they're conversations that we absolutely need to be having too.
So you kind of talked about Irish identity, and that's something obviously that is near and dear to both John and my hearts in Irish Stew. We kind of talk about the importance of a global Irish nation, meaning that the complete community of those Irish that have a hyphen in their name, being Irish American or Anglo-Irish or whatever, and the Irish native to Ireland itself, are a stronger community when they're bound together. I'm kind of wondering where you're sitting in that ferment right now. Do you see yourself as Irish? Do you see yourself as American? Do you see yourself as Irish or American? Where's the dash?
Yeah, I always find that, I found that interesting when I moved to the US, right? Because we never really, it was just kind of, I remember like sitting in like college or whatever, and someone was saying, oh, that Italian guy, you know, such and such. And I said, oh, there's someone from Italy here. I didn't realize, you know, and they're like, oh no, he's like Italian. I was like, oh, what do you mean he's not from, you know? So it wasn't that I was just more confused. I never really heard people refer to themselves, but then it was just a way of identifying, right? It is a way of identifying, and we do it in different ways at home. Well, where are you from? Where did you grow up? Who do you support? Like whatever. It's just a way of kind of trying to find maybe common ground or whatever. And I think that, for me, I mean, I obviously will always be Irish. I am a naturalized US citizen. I'm so proud to be, because, you know, I guess a topic for a whole other day is the voting rights of the Irish diaspora. But I mean, for so many years, I was not able to vote anywhere, even though I was an Irish citizen, because I wasn't living in Ireland and still cannot. So when I became a US citizen, that was such a huge joy and privilege for me, was to be able to vote. And so I definitely think of myself as both, I think, as like Irish and American. And then my husband is Polish American, so born in Chicago, but parents and kind of both sides of his family are Polish. So then my kids, I have two little kids. They're 7.5. The half is so important, and 5. And so they have Irish passports and they have American passports. And then they're obviously kind of Polish because my husband. So this is kind of things that we talk to them about all the time, and chatting about, you know, accents, and making sure that, you know, that they realize that like people speak, you know, sound different, and it doesn't make one person better than somebody else. And the way I might say like Irish stew versus stew, you know. But I do think these types of conversations need to be had at a young age to get kids thinking about things, and whether it's like privilege, diversity, just like the beauty in having people not all look and sound and you know, believe the same things that we do, I think is super important.
I'm always, there's always a little tussle with our daughter, with my Italian wife, you know. So my daughter took Italian language at college, but she took Irish literature. So we even the score. This has been just great. I mean, this is such a vital topic, and we couldn't be talking to anybody better on this topic. Fiona, this is the part of the show that all the guests eagerly anticipate, the famous Seamus plug, where you get a chance to let our listeners know about something near and dear to your heart that you'd like to direct them to.
I love that, by the way. I'm all about the fun. I think it's brilliant. Okay, so speaking of just kids and things like that, one thing that's near and dear to my heart is that I wrote a children's book on immigration. My timing was not great because it came out just before the pandemic last year, and I had all these events. I had 2 events booked in New York. But anyway, obviously everything got cancelled. But the book is called Our American Dream, and it is available on Amazon or wherever, all those Barnes and Nobles. It also is available. We have a website. It's called ouramericandreambooks.com, and I can sign books personally if they're bought through there. Also, a portion of the proceeds are going to 2 immigration nonprofits, and so that's really important to me. There's one through forward.us, a nonprofit, and it's the I Am an Immigrant initiative, which helps to celebrate just immigration storytelling and things like that. And then the other is the American Immigration Council, which is an advocacy group that did a lot of litigation in relation to family separation and other types of issues. So the book just kind of, I think, helps you talk to kids about immigration, and in a way that's appropriate for them, right? It's a picture book for kids, maybe like 5 to 10 or whatever. And so it just shares immigration stories, and I think gets to celebrate this idea of welcoming and being a diverse America. So that's my little plug for my children's book.
Fantastic. Our American Dream. Everywhere fine books are sold, including you can go to ouramericandreambook.com. And how about for your legal services? How do people get in touch with you there? Yeah,
so McEntee Law Group is our firm. So we're online, McEntee Law, every type of social media that you can think of. My handles are US Visa Lawyer. So I'm pretty active on Twitter, Instagram. I try to do little Instagram videos to update people on travel bans and, all sorts of, who knows what kind of updates are coming. But I try to do that regularly if there's any news. I know people have a lot of questions about the travel bans, so I'm happy to share whatever info I get there.
Fiona, really enjoyed that conversation. Appreciate you coming on and taking the time and educating us a little bit more. Hope to have the opportunity to have more conversations on this front. And I'd like to thank you on behalf of our listeners, and hopes that the whole legal profile of America when it comes to addressing these sensitive issues in immigration gets a little bit better, and consequently your life gets a little bit more enjoyable.
I hope so too. Thank you both for having me.
Thanks, Fiona.
Well, John, that was a really interesting conversation, and the one word that comes to mind when talking to Fiona for me is passion. She's passionate about what she does. But I'd like to hear what your take is.
You better hear what my take is here, Martin. So I had the same idea when I come off of one of these conversations. What's the one word that sticks out, or a few single words? And what I landed on was advocate, spokesperson, and entrepreneur. And she's walked a mile in her client's shoes, being an immigrant herself. And she brings us a practitioner's perspective on one of the thorniest, most complicated, most politically touchy issues in America today, immigration. And it's something that ranges from, refugees seeking political asylum to tech entrepreneurs who want to set up and hire people in the U.S. economy, from college students to migrant workers. Very, very complex.
Yeah, the one thing that came across in the conversation for me was just the creakiness of the American immigration system. This is a system that has not had any meaningful change. It's not really in a position to deal with highly skilled technical workers, because back when the law was last changed, that subset of jobs really didn't exist to the degree that exists right now. And the country, as a result, is missing a beat. Immigrants are the lifeblood of America. And it's a mistake not to be constantly revising law to deal with this particular issue.
Yeah, absolutely. We're losing things. And you could hear the frustration in her voice sometimes, whereas her approach is very positive and upbeat. Yeah, there's obviously some frustration in what she sees and what she deals with. And you really felt the concern for her clients. And she must be a great person to have in your corner when you're going through the morass of the immigration system, which you've been through. And I have been through, actually, to a certain aspect with my wife, Camille. So I know creaky too. It has been really, really creaky. And one last thing, Martin, good to get out to Chicago. Most of our episodes have either been in New York, Ireland, or the UK. And Chicago is a great Irish center in America, and great to take the trip out to Chicago.
Couldn't agree more, and a big hello to the Midwest.
Well, Martin, a lot of our listeners ask how they can help spread the global Irish conversation. What do you think?
Best thing people can do to help out the podcast is to simply share the episode. If you like what you've heard so far in this episode or other episodes, share it on social media, whether that's Facebook or whether that's Twitter or whether that's Instagram, or share it via email or word of mouth. All of those things are going to help us out. And don't be shy about dropping us a note. You can do so on our website. Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.